Hello and welcome to SACAC's first webinar on the early action and early decision plans. Dave, Maeve, and I are so excited to have you with us today, and we have 4 amazing panelists. The format will be very similar to the first webinar that we did, where we'll hear separately from each panelist with an opportunity for you to type in questions into the Q&A box. We'll start off by introducing each of our panelists, and then we'll jump right into the college perspective. So panelists, we've got Phil Hooper, the Director of College Counseling at Woodberry Forest. Hey, Phil.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for being with us today. We've got Tara Nelan, the Associate Director of College Counseling at Tampa Preparatory School.
Hi there.
Hey, Tara. We have Nadine Saint, the Assistant Director of Admission at the University of Richmond. Hi, Nadine.
Hello.
And Mary Wagner, the Director of Admission at University of South Carolina.
Hi, everyone. Go Gamecocks.
Woo! All right, well, Mary, we're going to jump right in with chatting with you about South Carolina, the plan that you have. And I wonder if you would just give those joining us today a quick snapshot of what the decision plans look like at the University of South Carolina.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me, everyone. For those of you who've been following the story at the University of South Carolina for some time now, we've always had an early answer deadline of October 15th and a priority freshman application deadline of December 1. And so at the University of South Carolina, we have 2 notification plans, one that includes a decision before the holidays in December, and then one that occurs in mid-March. This year, on account of the hurricane, we've actually extended our deadline until this Sunday, until right before midnight. So a lot of you all have received some communication about that already today. In previous weeks on social media, and our applicant pool and prospect pool has received some information about that. But we moved to an early action notification plan about 7 or 8 years ago, mainly to deal with our growing application volume, but also to help measure or manage a little bit of our selectivity. And so it is much easier for an institution to make a decision about the quality of their applicant pool when they kind of have this higher level view and they're able to look at the entire applicant pool all at once. Most of our students who will ultimately enroll at the University of South Carolina next fall are students who will apply through the early action program. It is non-binding, and students still have until May 1 to make their decision. For us, it's a volume management tool, but for the student, it gives them a way to get an application out of the way, especially if the university is one of their top choices, and then they can have some sort of a decision before the holidays so they can move forward with other components of getting enrolled at the institution, making additional visits, finalizing their financial aid, and so forth. So those are the main features of our program. And it's no more difficult to get in early than it is to get in through the regular notification plan. We use the same admission standard across the board. And we have had some students who will apply earlier, and we tend to admit a few that have better credentials, but at the end of the day, by March, the same standard applies across the entire applicant pool. Any questions from the group?
So, Mary, when you're thinking in your office about the early action plan, you said very clearly that there's no preference given between one or the other, but have you seen trends in terms of what students assume, what counselors assume, and is there any student who really would be a better fit to apply in the early action pool than to be in the regular pool?
Yeah, I think, the biggest question that we get right now are students worried about the October test dates. Those scores do tend to arrive after October 15th, and we've always had a practice of accepting October scores, and we'll add those to the student's record as long as they apply by the early answer deadline. We often get questions about, that they think that if they're applying earlier, that shows a more, commitment of interest to the institution. We find that in practice that tends to be the case, but that's not something that we consider in the admissions decision. We don't look at demonstrated interest as a factor for admissions purposes. It really is what we say it is, a great way for somebody who knows that they want to apply to the university when they want to get a decision earlier, than they might get from other institutions. So just go ahead, get that application out of the way, and allow us to start evaluating the students sooner. We think it's in our best interest and also in the students' best interest to get that decision out the door if we can as soon as possible, because we know the process is very stressful, and we want them to have as much information they can get up front to make a decision. I saw one of the questions that came up here that asked about how the new FAFSA deadlines are going to interact with our early action deadline, and really not so much. We're still using our traditional April 1 application deadline for the FAFSA as the priority application date. Earlier is certainly acceptable. We've already received over 6,000 FAFSAs for next year, but we aren't evaluating those yet. And we can talk a little bit more about how that's going to happen with a lot of other institutions, but I will just say that most colleges, like the University of South Carolina, a school of our size and scale, probably aren't going to be able to process a lot of their financial aid packages with regard to federal aid until after January 1 anyways. This is a new program. All of our computer systems need to be reprogrammed, and we have to do a lot of testing and apply these updates, and most colleges don't have that stuff in place right this very second. We also know that the new, that the Pell payment table, the Pell payment schedule, isn't going to come out until February of next year. So even though a student may know that they may be Pell eligible right now, they're not going to know how much Pell they're actually going to get. A lot of schools our size are not going to do preliminary award packages because we would just have to go back and redo them again in March or April of next year. And that's a lot of work for a school that has the kind of volume that South Carolina has.
All right. And, you know, South Carolina, if folks aren't familiar with your process, you use some really intentional language, Mary, around students who aren't successful in the first round of decisions in early action. Could you speak to that and some of the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so much of our process is being geared towards trying to be very transparent with students and also the counseling community about the students' chances of admission or the other kinds of things that they can do to be more competitive. When we make our first round notification in December, we tell students the decision is going to be an admit, a deny, or a delay. And the delay simply means we're going to need more time to evaluate the student relative to the rest of the applicant pool, and that we'll let them know in March. Then the next question we get when they get a delay is, well, what can I do to improve my chances? And if the student has taken the SAT or the ACT again, or plans to do that in December, we can accept those scores as long as they arrive by February 1. Probably one of the most popular questions we get is, well, now that I know about it, can I run out and register for one of these tests in January and have that count? And the answer is no, because the scores don't get to us by February 1. And the February 1 deadline is a requirement for us to be able to halt the loading of new information in the system so that we can have this bird's eye view of what the applicant pool looks like and then administer our merit-based aid. You got to cut it off somewhere, unfortunately, but it is the best way for us to get the majority of students who would have normally taken tests in the fall semester, in the first semester of their senior year, and have those evaluated so that we can distribute a limited amount of merit aid. We don't have a gridded out scholarship program where you know what you're going to get up front. We have to look at our finite pool of aid, look at the quality of the applicant pool, and then make awards based on that. So I'm glad you feel like it's very transparent. We do try to go to great lengths to do that and let people know where they stand. One other thing too, if the student's on a block schedule, sometimes those first semester grades can help. But if the student still has coursework in progress throughout the duration of the senior year, mid-year grades tend not to help the student because we will not compute them into our reevaluation of the student's GPA until we have a full unit of credit. So only students who are on a block schedule really benefit from a mid-year grade situation.
So one final question for you, Mary. For an independent or a new counselor or somebody who isn't intimately familiar with any school, whether it's University of South Carolina or another institution, where do they go to learn the nuances of your decision plan?
Well, we have some information available on our website, and we try to post some updates about to students on the main admissions website, sc.edu/admissions. And so we're very proactive about Q&A inserts that we will even send to the student when they get a delayed decision. and try to preempt some of the questions that we know that they're going to get. And we also list those on our website too and link to that. So those can range from anything from, I got a delay. Why does that happen? What are my chances of admission? Is this related to my residency? Is it harder to get in as an in-state student versus an out-of-state student? All those things, we try to be upfront about where we are on that process and let them know periodically. And then we also communicate with the student through their checklist. If there's something that we need or we think would give them an advantage, we'll let them know and we'll tell them, hey, we need this information in order to make a better decision. We do ask that students not send additional recommendations. That's usually about the time that we get to see this onslaught of recommendations from third parties, including parents, which are not very reliable sources for recommendations we found. They all think their kids are great. I'm sure they are. But recommendation letters, if we need them, we'll ask for them, but we only require them for students who are applying to the Honors College. And just remind students that, the quality of the application and what they put on the application, what they list, their personal statement, those things really are used when we go through the holistic review process. Colleges actually are pretty darn good at asking for exactly what they need and what they want to consider in the admissions process. And so when they say, we don't need anything else, we're not asking for anything else, you could probably take them at their word. And every institution's trying to manage their process based on their volume and their needs and what their shaping goals are, which vary from institution to institution. So if they say no need to send additional stuff, they probably mean it. A lot of times that stuff just gets lost if it's sent without us asking for it, and it's put in a separate file because it's not absolutely necessary.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. We will be back on with you at the very end for Q&A. So Nadine is with us from the University of Richmond. And Nadine, will you share with us a little bit about the decision plans and what it looks like for a student who may be applying to your institution?
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 rounds of early decision, ED1 and ED2. And the first deadline being mid-November, and then the second coincides with our regular decision deadline of January 15th. We also have an early deadline for students who want to be considered for merit-based scholarships, and that's December 1, but that's just an early deadline. It doesn't have any sort of implication in terms of binding or non-binding. So both our early decision rounds are binding at Richmond. So big decision to kind of make with your student and their family. And we usually make up the percentage of the class that goes early decision is about 40%. We're not looking to increase that. That's something that we want to hold steadfast at 40%. So still a majority of the applicant pool is coming in regular decision.
So it sounds like with a really intentional focus on how you're shaping the class and what you're looking for, are you noticing any trends between a student who is applying early decision and those that are applying regular decision? What tends to be the distinguishing factor for them?
So I would say that our early decision pool is slightly less competitive. The acceptance rate is slightly higher, usually around 45%, whereas our regular decision admit rate was about 32% last year. So in a way, I think we're putting a little bit of a thumb on the scale in terms of honoring the commitment that students are making to us, in terms of saying, if I get admitted to Richmond, I'm coming sort of no matter what. I want to be a Spider. So that's what we want to honor. So because we have a smaller applicant pool, it is slightly less competitive. I think we can be a little bit more flexible in terms of our institutional goals of, academic and testing wise. So that gives us a little bit more in terms of room and looking at SAT scores and academics. So whereas in the regular decision pool, we're looking at more A's than B's, I think in early decision, it can be a little bit more a mix of both, maybe a slant towards more B's than A's, and a little bit on the lower end of our middle 50% for our testing. So we're still operating under that holistic review. So I say kind of thumb on the scale to an extent, but I think, again, just gives us a little bit more wiggle room. I will say, too, that we fill a majority of that early decision portion of the class through early decision 1. We get a majority of our applicants through that decision process.
That makes a lot of sense. When you're looking at your overall application pool and the number of applications that you bring in on a year basis, what percentage of them are applicants from the ED pool?
Yeah, so we had about 10,400 applications last year. Total, we had probably about 750 applications for early decision. So it is a small part of our pool. I think we had about just over 500 for early decision 1 and about 250 for early decision 2. So it is kind of a smaller piece of our applicant pool, though we do receive, I would say, over half of our applications by that December 1st deadline. So that, I think, helps us in the way that we utilize early decision is certainly to manage our yield and creating that class, but also sort of calibrating to see how the pool is shaping up. I think that helps us a lot in kind of understanding what our applicants look like in those early weeks as we kind of see how we're going to move through the rest of our decision process. When we're looking at early decision applicants, we also we defer, deny, and admit students. So we have 3 decisions coming out for students, and we also will waitlist deferred students. So that could be a decision that comes to them later down the line.
So we got a question from somebody tuning in, and we all know that when students are submitting their applications, there's a trend to finish the application earlier in the year, even if you're not applying in that early decision pool. So at Richmond, what would it look like if somebody applied before the early decision deadline but was wanting to be a regular applicant?
Yeah, so they would just have to let us know that they've changed their mind, because what they do is they just have to select ED, ED2, or regular. So they make that decision. So whether the time at which they submit their application doesn't necessarily matter, because they have to select the way that they're applying to Richmond. So they would select early decision or regular and make that nuance. If they chose to apply early and then said, ooh, I'm not quite ready to make that commitment, actually, they can just let us know, and we can obviously change their decision code to regular, but the timing of their application doesn't necessarily matter, with exception to being considered for merit-based scholarships for December 1.
Great. I think that's a really important point to reiterate, that the student has to opt in to a different decision plan outside of regular. So whether it's at Richmond or South Carolina or any school where you're counseling a student, that's an important piece to make sure that they're checking and that they're applying in the appropriate space. Nadine, we have another question that's come in. And for campuses that don't offer deferred or delay decisions with ED, they either admit or they deny. So they cut loose. And you have a student who has these marginal grades. So like you said, maybe they are more Bs than As and Bs. Mm-hmm. If that student has a chance of getting denied, is it still better for them to apply in that ED pool, or should they wait and try to bring up their grades or bring in other credentials and apply in that regular pool? How would you advise that student?
I think that choosing to apply early certainly is a big personal decision in terms of your commitment to the institution. I think if you're on the bubble, at least at Richmond, I think your chances at an admit decision are higher. So that I think would be beneficial to the student. I always say that, though, with slight hesitation, as early decision also shouldn't necessarily be used as an admission strategy. It really is for students who are 100% committed to saying yes. Again, no matter what, because we're counting on you to say yes. Should you be admitted? Yeah, I think it's a personal decision, and kind of you have to weigh the potential outcomes of what that might be. But if you're, definitely 100% committed, I think early decision is the way to go.
with early decision, there's always so much weighing on everybody in that process, because as college counselors, we sign off on it. The student is signing off on it. The parent is signing off on it. And obviously the school, like you said, is expecting that student will attend. But we always hear these stories, or these horror stories that may or may not be true, about what happens if a student ultimately can't afford to attend or something comes up. So can you share with us a time where, or any advice just in that in general, when has it happened? When is it okay for it to happen? And what should a counselor do if a student who's been accepted ED comes to us and says, we can't make it work financially? What's the next step?
Yeah, so that's completely understandable. And I think a hard part of the early decision process is we have a lot of students who say, yes, Richmond is 100% where I want to be, but not really sure financially if we can make it work. So for the most part, we try to guide students to say, if your intention is to compare financially packages, early decision might not be the right path for you. That being said, there is sort of this urban myth that, like, if you can't ultimately enroll under early decision because of financial reasons or other reasons, like you're on the hook for a year of tuition, or some of these kind of crazy things that you hear, and that's not the case. We ask that students write a letter to our dean of admission explaining why they would not be enrolling or not accepting their offer admission under early decision, and the dean does review those letters. We are a common application exclusive school, so in the early decision agreement, it explicitly states that one of the ways to get out of the early decision contract is if finances is a factor. So certainly we understand that, especially given the price tag of a private institution. So we just ask that students explain in a letter why they're not coming. What I think will help students make that decision for us this year with prior is that early decision students will get their actual package with their admission decision. So last year, students would get an estimate, and 99% of the time it would look similar to what their actual package would look similar to what they got in that estimate. But this year, students and families will have the actual numbers in their hands in order to make that enrollment decision. So I think that's going to help students that they can actually see, the facts and figures in black and white when making that enrollment deposit.
That's incredible. And I think that's such a service to students and to families as they're making that decision. And if you, just to reiterate, what Nadine is saying is that most schools are making the effort with early decision to include the financial based information if a student is submitting the FAFSA and that kind of information, so that they have everything they need to really enroll in that school confidently with their decisions. Well, thank you so much, Nadine. Nadine will be available at the end for Q&A if you have any other questions specific to early decision. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, so Tara is joining us next. Hey, Tara.
Hi, Erin.
So let's just jump right into it. As a counselor this year, what trends are you seeing? Are you seeing more people apply early action and early decision than you have in the past? Maybe provide some context too. How long have you been in the field? The years of experience that you have, all those great things too.
Sure. Shockingly enough, this is my 10th graduating class at Tampa Prep. So exciting. Before that, I was in college admissions at a small public university in Florida. So pretty exciting about that. I've been in this field for quite some time and grateful for it and all of the wonderful colleagues I've met along the way. And I have seen anecdotally an uptick in early decision and early action applications. That could be from a variety of resources. It could be the early engagement of our students. It could be genuine interest in that institution. It could be the fact, similar to what Mary was saying, is that students' confidence levels in the whole college application journey seems to increase once they get an early yes in their pocket. Which is what Mary alluded to earlier. So sometimes too, it's good if a student, if it actually is more beneficial. So there is an uptick anecdotally. Currently right now, the students are reporting half the class will apply either early action or early decision. I didn't pull any data for previous years though. So of course there are bad reasons to apply early for our students. Sometimes they think it might be a rush or a race to get to the finish. And that could be generated by factors such as their parents. Social media could drive that, friends could drive that, the piles of mail coming into them could drive that also. So, and emails. Does that help?
Oh, those emails.
Yes, those emails.
So this question has two parts for you.
Okay.
When you have a student who comes to you and says, Ms. Nelan, I really want to apply early decision to this school, what questions do you ask them to make sure that they're picking it for the right reasons? And the flip side of that is when you're meeting with a student and you have a gut feeling that they should be an ED candidate, what are the indicators that make you think that? And how do you communicate that with the student and the family?
Oh, okay. So, well, there are typically the early decision is not a surprise because the family has been engaged in the conversation and the understanding of the different admission plans since their junior year, and they've visited their colleges, they've done their due diligence, they've explored. So really from my part, just making sure that they've done that due diligence, they have visited their colleges, they are choosing a school that's genuinely a good fit for them. You know, it could be a case that they're leveraging a legacy that a parent may have graduated from that institution, and that's the best way to leverage the early decision and leverage the legacy is to use the early decision at the institution. And you know, they could be a genuine fit for early decision, but as you know, Nadine alluded to with the financial aid piece, there has to be a conversation to be sure that the family is okay applying early decision, because that then removes the option for them to compare financial aid packages at other institutions. So it's a matter of asking those questions, of being sure that the financial aid is not going to be a deciding factor in where they're going, that they've done genuine research. Sometimes at some schools it's for a student who is a recruitable athlete, but there are nuances to that too, that some schools don't want athletes applying early decision. And probably the not so good reason to apply early decision, and this happened earlier today, in fact, is somebody fessing up that I'm applying early decision somewhere, I just don't know where yet. Yes, that happens. So typically fruitful early decision conversations happen in the junior year, and so it's really not a surprise. And the second part of your Erin, can you remind me the part B of that?
Part B of that question is, you have been meeting with students presumably at least junior year and now into the beginning of senior year, and you're starting to get this feeling that, gosh, this is their top school, they'd be a much better candidate if they applied early decision. How do you approach that conversation with a family, and what leads to that feeling for you?
Thank you. So that is sharing facts with the family, so pulling up historical data not only from our school. Of course, they have access to this information on the college's website, you know, through our own internal tools that they have access to, but kind of making sense of that data and showing them that early decision might be a good fit, where they might be stretching themselves academically a little bit, and that early decision can help their application. And really that comes with experience, that comes with keeping up with the trends in our field. So it's participating in professional development, building relationships with colleges. It's reading the material when the colleges send it in an email and understanding what early decision and early action applications mean for that particular school. Listening and hearing the colleges when they visit campus and how they look at early decision and early action, how many, you know, a big pool of students that come from early decision, or is it a small number of students that come from early decision? Who are they looking at in that early decision pool? So it's keeping up with the trends, understanding the colleges, and of course, if I have questions, if it's a school that maybe we haven't worked with in the past with early decision, it's okay for me to call or the student to call to learn a little bit more about that path.
In your experience, 10 years on the high school side, is there a one-stop shop where you could ever find all of the information you need about each school's nuance?
No.
So it's really about that individual not being afraid to reach out, utilizing connections, and letting that student do that inquiry piece as well.
Yes, the student self-advocacy piece is important in learning and collecting the information. And I can, I'm here to help them make sense of it. And if they don't know where to get that information, I can guide them to finding that information. Whether it's meeting with the college rep when they're here. Some college representatives, this probably happens in Atlanta too, some college representatives set up shop and they invite students to come to the coffee shop for 20-minute intervals. So it's just a matter of encouraging the students to be a self-advocate in their research, and then from our end, from my end, the professional development piece, and just keeping up with the information and the trends and what schools are asking on the application and what they're looking for in an applicant, and helping guide the student to figure if it's a good fit for them or not.
So in your experience, for a student who either applies early action and is deferred, or is being considered for delayed admission, or they're in an early decision pool and they get rolled into a regular pool, what do you do to counsel that student? What do those conversations look like? Do you, on your end as a counselor, have strategies for advocating for that student?
So when a student is completing an early decision application specifically, encouraging them to put their best application forward. That goes without saying for any application, doing their best, not kind of writing it off and submitting it. But then really encouraging them using supportive, every student is different. You know this, Nadine knows this, Mary knows this, Phil knows this. So everybody knows that every student is a little bit different and receives information differently. So it's very student specific, but really using supportive language and encouraging language for their application, and then helping them visualize the best case scenario, the okay scenario, which is that deferral, that maybe, and then the worst case scenario, which is, of course, the deny. So in helping them understand that the deferral situation and the deny situation, I try to help them prepare for that by encouraging them to look at the other schools that they've considered and actually selecting schools that they love and work on those applications. So that way those applications are complete and ready to go, just in case the school decides to defer or deny the student from early decision. All they need to do during the semester break is log on and hit submit, rather than almost panicking and maybe tossing out applications that aren't as genuine as they had been up until that point.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I said absolutely. Final question. When you have a student who is put on a wait list, how do you explain to them the difference between being deferred and being waitlisted?
I think the most heartbreaking process or journey or decisions that a student could receive is going from an early decision or an early action to a deferral to a wait list. That is just dragging the student right along, and it's incredibly heartbreaking. So, students that are on the wait list, again, it goes back to being aware of the literature and the information that the college is providing. There's so many of our colleagues and our friends at the college side that provide such wonderful information and insights in defining what the decision plans are and the best steps for the student. But if it's not clear, I'm okay calling and asking. And I'm okay calling and asking about the historical data on the use of the wait list, and what it might look like for this current student's class. And then encouraging the student to follow those instructions that the college puts forth. That could be, staying active on the wait list. The student needs to be involved in their status check tool. If the college has that as an option, the student should follow the instructions, like how they accept a spot on the wait list. And if the college is encouraging a student to send an update form, because by that point, the student has submitted their application so many months earlier, they probably do have an update and the college would welcome that. And of course, I think the one standard answer, and Nadine can correct me if I'm wrong, but usually the colleges do not encourage waitlist students to revisit as much as they want to. Colleges definitely encourage students not to do that and instead remain active in other ways. Most importantly, too, we encourage students to deposit somewhere by May 1st. They have to reserve their seat by May 1st somewhere, and they can always change if they're taken off the wait list.
Thank you so much, Tara.
Thanks, Erin.
So we've gotten 2 questions that will go back to the ED piece, and so I just want to put it out there that we'll get to those questions in the general Q&A, but they have to do more with the wait list piece. So we'll jump to Phil for now. Thanks, Tara. Hey, Phil.
Hello.
Hey. Phil, will you give us some context about your role and your experience?
Yeah, I've had some experience on the admission side at 3 different small liberal arts and science colleges, and Woodberry Forest is my 4th college prep school. So yeah, I've been at it a little bit.
That's so exciting too, though, because it gives you so many different perspectives from school to school on both sides of the desk as we look at these questions, because there's, I'm sure you've seen this, the increasing anxiety around having quick answers and quick decisions, quick wins for students. What have you seen at Woodberry or some of the previous high schools that you've worked at in terms of trends for early action or early decision?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because that was something I was hoping to get to, is sort of how things have changed since I've been doing this. And it's interesting that there was a time actually when a student could apply to a highly selective first choice school regular decision amongst his or her other interests, and so with the, and I'm talking about a rather select group of schools here, but with these highly selective schools, if you, some of these ones that have single digit acceptance percentages, if you want to apply, if you want to go to one of those schools, it's your first choice school, now you have to apply early decision. Examples being Duke, Vandy, Northwestern, Penn, places that practice early decision. Their numbers are certainly more forgiving for early decision than for regular. And it just seems like when you look at the data that if you want to go to one of those schools, the kid comes into your office and says, you know what, I really love Penn. I'm looking at that kid thinking, okay, I hope you're lined up to apply early. Because that's kind of what the data suggests. So it kind of changes the nature of the counseling. Used to, you would approach early decision the kind of the way that Tara described. That's the textbook version. You look for all the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed. You look for the student to be in good standing, competitive for that particular school, have the testing in place, and appear to be a good match. And parents are on board. So that's a great situation, right? All systems go. And now there may be a student plop down in your office, in April or sometimes even August, September, and say, I want to go to Vanderbilt. And I'm thinking, okay, let's check and see that you've got your ducks in a row, because we're probably going to be getting an application out early as opposed to later.
I'm glad that you clarified that. And just for all of our listeners as well, I think they're throwing concrete blocks outside of Phil's
construction outside my window. Sorry for the timing.
No,
earlier.
It's great. It's fine. So what do you do then if you've got a student who comes to you in August? It's all of our worst nightmares. They sit down and they say Vanderbilt or bust, or a school that we know is a better early decision option. They don't have their testing necessarily done, or they haven't done something extra that they need. How do you approach that conversation with that student or that family?
If they say Vanderbilt or bust, the student is the driver in this process. We are always counseling for our students to take ownership of the process, right? So if a student says to me Vanderbilt or bust, I'm taking that at face value. It could be that I'm looking at a situation where a student is lining himself up for an early deny, and I may have to grin and bear it. There'll be obvious points in the counseling conversation where you sensitize them to that possibility. you know, and you talk through these things. Here's what the data suggests. You realize it's some severity of reach. It's a high reach. It's a severe reach, depending on what wording you like in your office. But you prepare the student for that. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a touch and go situation. They've got a fighting chance to get in, and the conversation isn't quite as hard. But I think that there are obvious situations where the conversation is hard. You just simply have to go there. You let the data do the talking for you in a lot of instances. You talk about having very, very sound backup plans. And you also talk about the process as though it will continue throughout the fall, the late fall and winter, as you should really with any EA-ED candidate, because of the possibility of deferral, delay. They should be looking at retesting. They should be, of course, always concentrating first and foremost on performance in the classes. So yeah, that's part of the counseling as well.
So to give you another counseling curveball, what would it look like if you have a student that you know from your work with them that they're a high need? They will have demonstrated need, and that will be a factor in their decision process, but they know that it's a school that they really want to go to. That's early decision. How do you balance that gamble if it's a school that may or may not meet 100% of demonstrated need, et cetera? What are the things that you kind of look for to help that family make that decision between early decision, early action, or regular decision?
Ooh, why did I get all the toughest questions? So if I understand, you know, the complexity of your question, it's that student who really is looking perhaps like he or she is not a great early decision candidate. Is that kind of what you were setting me up to address?
Well, I guess I was thinking of a scenario where we might be aware of an institution that has really great pathways for students that affordability is going to be a barrier. But it also happens to be an early decision school. And so if that student will be best positioned by applying early decision, but we also know that money will be a factor, yet there's a chance that the institution will meet that, how do we in good conscience counsel through that scenario?
Well, I think sort of like I was indicating just a minute ago, you talk through the scenario of their possibly seeing a financial aid package that looks insufficient to them, and how that does represent, in most cases, an out for an early decision commitment. But that shouldn't be a gamesmanship strategy to appear to be, you know, a strong early decision applicant. That if in fact this is a first choice school, which you should be able to ferret out, that may in fact be the appropriate choice, because why, after all, should a student of high need be discouraged from early decision? That's not fair. We don't want to do that to those students. They have just as much right to an early decision pathway and perhaps a better chance to be admitted to that school as anyone does. So we should be very conscientious of that fact. And then help them understand the fact that their expected family contribution will be around sooner as opposed to later now with prior, that they can go on and do a net price calculator and get a sense of what that's going to be even earlier than the prior process. And be set up to understand what the potential financial aid situation looks like. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, if that is, you know, one of the concerns for this particular family, and they're not gaming the system, they're not just applying early because they think that is the only way to get into that school, yeah, I think you go forward with that situation. Meanwhile, you have to have, as always, a very strong backup plan. There've got to be those schools that student loves that are on the list. They need to show those schools some love and investigate those schools as thoroughly as they have that first choice school. Again, possibly look at retesting, those kinds of things, to be prepared for the potentiality of a defer, that kind of thing. Or being set up to be a stronger candidate for those regular decision situations that exist on the list. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And both Bill and Tara have mentioned, and I think it bears repeating, this idea that as counselors, we want to make sure that we're having conversations with students about if-then scenarios. So multiple different outcomes, multiple different plans. And that helps them either affirm a decision that they're making to apply early decision and know that they have opportunities if an early action or early decision plan doesn't roll out. Phil, in your experience with students who are waitlisted or deferred, what sort of strategies have you seen be effective, whether it's, second semester grades or retesting or beating down the door of an institution? What works, what doesn't work?
Waitlisted brownies are always a good idea. Send brownies. I think the mid-year reporting process is a good strategy for a student who's deferred. Look for anything that is taken place since the application was submitted, an accolade won. Excuse me, I've just lost my video here. I can't talk if I can't see who I'm talking to. Accolades that have been, extended since the time the application went in. New clubs or organizations they formed or had accomplishments in, just any kind of update that they think will enhance their record. That's a good thing to do when deferred. It also could help with wait lists. I think depending on the school, there are oftentimes strategies there where some contact with the school is a good idea. So a letter stating intentionality, interest in the school, commitment to the school rather, sometimes can be very helpful.
In your experience, do you have students who want to know, like, I get this question a lot, what number am I on the wait list? How do I figure that out? In your experience on both sides of the desk, is that true? What does it look like? Does it matter? How do you figure that out if it's actually a thing?
Yeah, it's generally not a thing. If it's a thing, it's a closely guarded thing. And schools want to maintain their flexibility in deciding who comes off the wait list. Unfortunately, there are situations where schools are going to look to whether or not that student has any need or is full pay. And that's kind of a sad reality that we have to deal with, but it's there nonetheless. And I think students need to be made aware of that. So yeah, I think as Tara suggested, you can ferret out sometimes good information about the extent to which a school will go to its wait list historically, how they're setting up for that particular year. You can sometimes get some information that could be critical to a student's hope for remaining on the wait list or giving up the ship and moving on. One thing that's interesting too, and I think that all of us have experienced this, once a student deposits to a school, goes on Facebook and finds a roommate for that school, they pick out matching bedspreads and curtains, they're not coming, even if they get a waitlist offer, they're ditching it. They're so into their new school. It's interesting how seldom they want to accept that waitlist offer.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We're going to bring all of our panelists back now. And for those of you tuning in, if you want to hit the gallery view button, it'll allow you to view our screens Brady Bunch style, which just makes it easier than everybody flipping back and forth. So there's also a Q&A button on your screen. So if there's a question that you are just dying to know, you can go ahead and submit that to us either through the chat or through the Q&A, and we will take that in.
Erin, can I make a point?
Please do, Phil.
Yeah, it came up just a minute ago. I think you asked Tara a question about one-stop shopping for information on early decision, early action numbers and how those situations might be playing out at certain institutions. There's certainly not one place for all that information, but the Axis website does have good research data on early decision and early action numbers. So you can get some good insight as to the situation at a particular school by looking at that data.
Bill, is that resource available to someone who may not be an Access member?
I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, it can be shared. Sure. It's not guarded, and no one wants to be selfish with that information. So we in the counseling community are a very friendly group. So we're eager for our colleagues to know. So ask if you want access to that data.
Perfect. Nadine, Mary, do you have any places that you would recommend that a counselor look if they're trying to find more information on early action or early decision plans, or what might be changing from year to year?
I always say I'm the best resource. I definitely am always willing to have conversations with counselors about our early decision agreements and sort of our process. So I always say that your admission rep is the best resource. So unfortunately not seeing, one big database of schools sort of across the country, but building those relationships, I think, is probably the most important way to understand the nuance of each process.
Just from my perspective, EA and how it's used and how it's rolled out has this very operations focused element on the admissions side that I think a lot of people maybe it's harder to see and it's harder to explain. But as institutions, I mean, for us, the reason why we've done EA is really to do volume management. Our applications have doubled in the past decade, and we continue to get a lot more. But it is really difficult to decide how you're going to do that up front and then funnel that all to a central resource. So as Nadine says, I mean, you're really going to have to keep in contact with the institutions that you think are most likely to have EA or ED options that your students are interested in. Unfortunately, that's not a perfect way to do it, but it can vary from year to year, and an institution is going to adjust their processes accordingly if they have to, based on their volume or what's going on. They're going to reserve the right to do that.
Perfect. Well, we have no more questions in the queue. So thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Mary, Nadine, Tara, Phil, Dave behind the scenes putting this webinar together. We appreciate you all, and this will be recorded and available on the SACAC website probably tomorrow under the webinars tool. So everybody have a good rest of the day. You made it through October 15th. We're rooting for you for November 1. Take care.